Well, howdy, y'all. Welcome to Once Upon a Time in Texas, episode number 92. I cannot believe that I've done over 90 of these podcasts for y'all, but I do have some faithful listeners and followers, and for those of y'all, thank you. They give me some good suggestions when I talk to them. I am your host, Michael Mitchell. A couple of random things. So, it is the week of Thanksgiving, and, kids are out of school, wife's out of school, and we're not traveling up to see my sister as we do occasionally up in Oregon, and my wife really wanted to go somewhere, and so she did a little digging and decided to go to the Texas Renaissance Fair down in Plantersville, Texas, just north of Houston, and it was, I'll say it's cool. I'm not really into the dress up fantasy stuff. I mean, I've got some kilts and things like that, but, I'm not into the dress up fantasy, whatever. But the wife and kids are. I mean, they enjoy that stuff. And so I thought, well, crap, I'll be the chauffeur and I'll try to enjoy myself. And we went down, and I will say, other than the expense, which, I mean, everything there is geared towards having you spend $1 or $2 or $1,000. And anyway, we went down and camped. It was cool. It was a beautiful weekend. We towed our trailer with all of our camping stuff in it. I mean, we do have it's like a 6x12 trailer. I got tired of having our camping stuff kind of all over the house, so I ended up with an enclosed trailer, and we drug it down there and threw out our stuff in case we wanted to cook and all that. And so it was cool. I saw lots of interesting people, lots of great costumes or regalia. I don't know what the proper term is. I don't want to offend anybody with that, but it was just, I saw some cool stuff. I saw some people who should not have been dressed the way they are. There was a lot more squeeging out of places than than there should have been, and there were a few that were. I'll just say the right things were squeeging out all over, and it looked very good. So there's a full gamut of people. I will say that Saturday, this was the second to the last weekend. It was the Celtic weekend, I think, and. By about 3:30, and the place is huge, but about 3:30 in the afternoon, I was about peopled out. There were just so many people there. You couldn't hardly turn around without bumping into somebody. And I don't mind people. Like, I like being around people, but when crowds start getting too big, like, I don't get a lot of anxiety. I guess I just start to get frustrated because just feels like everybody's in my damn way, and I just, I don't know. I end up getting frustrated, kind of mad, and so I told my wife about 3:30, I'm about peopled out, and I'm ready to go back to the campsite and just chillax. And our campsite was like 0.7 of a mile from the entrance, and my son is a lot like me, and he was about peopled out too, and so we started heading back to the campsite, and I think that was around 4 or 4:15, and it took us till, well, and we did stop and eat, I will say that, but we ended up not getting back to the campsite until 6 or 6:15, something like that. So, it was a ways out there, but I will tell you it was cool. My wife did know, she knows me well, that I was probably going to struggle with the amount of people and the thought of being in fantasy land or whatever. And so she set me up for a forge session, and I got to make a knife out of a railroad spike, which, at a place called the Dragon Forge. And that was pretty cool. I've always been interested in blacksmithing. I did some, when I worked for the Boy Scouts at Philmont Scout Ranch, and just working with metal, doing that kind of stuff. It's just always interested me. I've always wanted to get a forge. I really, in my younger years, wanted a coal forge, with the blower that you turn and just the sound. And those aren't super efficient. So anyway, so now I'm looking at forges, and who knows, maybe I'll have a blacksmith shop. Because why not add to the list of crap that I do? But anyway, so I'm looking into it. We'll see what happens. But it was really cool. I will say the reason I was about peopled out was we were talking Sunday morning when we went back in for a little while. The lady said, yeah, we had a great weekend. The weekend before was Barbarians weekend, and they had over 50,000 people on Saturday. And she said the Celtic weekend, which is where, the weekend we were there this last weekend, they had like 47,300 people. And so, yeah, there was a reason I was about peopled out. Because a lot of people somewhat local, I guess within a couple hour drive, just drive in for the day. So a lot of them didn't get there until after lunch. And that's when my eye was starting to twitch and all that. So anyway, but it's hard to admit, just because, I think about all the expenses and everything, and my wife, God love her, she only thinks about the experiences, and that's why we make a good team. But I did have a good time, even though my kids said I was grumpy, and I didn't think I was grumpy. I was really trying to have a good time. But it was fun. It's not something I would go do a lot, but I've been there once, so I can mark that off the bucket list, and if my wife and kids want to go back, then maybe I'll let them, go do it. And so, I would recommend anybody in Texas, or nearby, go check it out. It's worth checking out. But on the way back, I've been watching daughter number 2. We bought her a truck for my best friend, and it had a hole in the tailgate. And so that's why we named the truck The Black Hole. And so since we bought it, whatever it was, 3, 4, 5 months ago, I've been keeping an eye out for another tailgate for this thing. And they're all aluminum tailgates, so they're a little tough to fix. It's, your regular body shop doesn't do that stuff. And I ran across a tailgate in Dallas. It was too good to be true. The guy wanted like $120. And so I reached out and I said, hey, I'm down in the Houston area. We're coming back through up to Wichita Falls. Will you be around on Sunday afternoon? And he said, yeah. And so we stopped by there, and sure enough, he had a tailgate that would fit her truck, and it was $120. All the others that I'd been finding were like $500 or $600 plus. We bought it, brought it home, put it on our truck last night, and it looks fantastic. So that was great. In the meantime, daughter number 1 goes to the library here in Wichita Falls and is backing into a spot, and I guess thought that another parked truck was a little further over and backed right into the front bumper. So I guess that was her first bumble as a new driver. She'd been driving a little over a year on her own, and she does great. And she was terrified and crying, and I felt bad for her, but at least it wasn't a big wreck like at a stoplight or something like that. And we weren't able to find the guy. We left a note. He called me about an hour or so later, and he was super cool about it. And so we're working through the process there. But anyway, started calling daughter number 1 Crash, and she doesn't like that. It really pissed her off. And I'm probably going to rub that in a little longer. But God, if that's all that ever happens to her, knock on wood here, I hope that's the worst wreck that she ever has. Because Lord knows I've done a lot worse. And thankfully never been hurt. But you know what? It just crunched her bumper up on the corner a little bit, and crunched his bumper a little bit. And I've got a buddy in Rotary that's going to help us with getting it, not her truck, but getting the other guy's truck fixed. And like I said, he was really cool about it. So anyway, that's what's going on in the life of the Mitchell clan. Let's jump into this podcast. Did you know the first Thanksgiving in North America was actually held in Texas? But wait, there were actually 2 Thanksgivings held in Texas before the one we all know and love. Yeah, and there's even a little controversy around those, because of course. So before we jump into it, as always, I'd like to thank our sponsors, me and Victory Home Loans. I know there are tons of people moving to and in Texas and Oklahoma, where I am licensed. And so if you know anybody moving to or in Texas or Oklahoma, looking to buy a house, looking to refinance a house, or looking to do a reverse mortgage, buy some land, any of that kind of stuff, send them my way. Send them on over to themichaelmitchell.com, THE, michaelmitchell.com. We do construction loans, land loans, DSCR for investments. I haven't done one of those yet, but I'd like to. Working with a broker is not something that a lot of people here in Texas and Oklahoma do yet on mortgages. They do it for insurance and stuff like that. But the long and the short of it is we are faster, cheaper, and easier than working with the big bank. And so even if you're moving to another state out west, let me know, because I've got fellow Victory Home Loan mortgage loan officers that are licensed there, and we can get you hooked up and do great stuff. But yeah, Victory Home Loans, it's a great place to do business for sure. And working with a guy like me, handsome, chunky, bearded fellow who goes to Ren fairs. Not in my kilt, though. I didn't take my kilt. So check me out. Send them on over to themichaelmitchell.com, THE michaelmitchell.com. So where did this week's idea come from? Well, it's Thanksgiving. It's the week of Thanksgiving, of course. And I heard it on the radio last week, something about the first Thanksgiving being held in Texas. And I thought to myself, what? No way. And then I had to go check it out. So I did a little digging, and I ran across two articles that I like that kind of explain the whole thing. Our first is from the Austin American Statesman at statesman.com. And the other is from texasalmanac.com. So we're going to start with the Statesman because it actually has a historical marker because, we love historical markers in Texas, and they are all absolutely the truth because you can pull over on the side of the road and read them. So the article says, Thanksgiving is almost here, and families across the country are preparing for hearty meals and special gatherings, which I hope all of you are. While the holiday is traditionally linked to the Northeast, most notably the 1621 celebration in Plymouth Colony, Massachusetts, Texas has its own surprising connections to Thanksgiving. In fact, the first Thanksgiving may not have happened in Plymouth, after all. According to the Library of Congress, a similar feast of gratitude took place in May 1541, nearly 80 years earlier in what is now Texas. Spanish explorer Francisco Vasquez de Coronado and his expedition are believed to have celebrated the event in Palo Duro Canyon. For those of y'all that don't know where that is, that's way up in the panhandle of Texas, kind of close to Amarillo. The first Thanksgiving is traditionally recognized as the 1621 feast in Plymouth Colony, Massachusetts, shared between the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag people. However, according to the Library of Congress, a similar ceremony took place decades earlier in what is now Texas, marking an overlooked but significant moment in history. Let's dig into that. In May 1541, Spanish explorer Francisco Vasquez de Coronado led an expedition of approximately 1,500 men through the Texas Panhandle in search of the legendary 7 Cities of Gold. After enduring months of grueling travel and harsh conditions, the group stopped in Palo Duro Canyon to hold a Thanksgiving celebration, expressing gratitude for their survival and reaffirming their faith. Now, total side note, they were looking for the 7 Cities of Gold. They did not find the 7 Cities of Gold, obviously, and I may do another podcast on this later, but the long and the short of it, if I remember right, I think it was Coronado, at least a few of his men, wrote in their journals about basically what a vast desert and just terrible place the Texas Panhandle and Kansas and Oklahoma, they kind of marched all over. And not realizing, I guess, the potential that it is now, the breadbasket and, huge oil capacity and all that. But yeah, they pretty much saw it as a desert, kind of a big, giant, worthless chunk of land. And they were not kind in their wording about the American Southwest. They were probably really more pissed that they didn't find this 7 cities of gold, which coincidentally, a total side note, is anybody else out there watching The Mystery of Blind Frog Ranch? I am, and I'm fascinated. I don't know why. I'm always fascinated by, treasure hunting and looking for gold, because I like the TV show Gold Rush. But yeah, there's a pretty good argument and a pretty good theory that the Aztecs may have actually started in Utah, which is why the Blind Frog Ranch is kind of at the epicenter of all this looking for gold. And when, the Spanish came over and they were looking for the gold and the Aztec moved all their gold, there are a lot of theories that point that they took it back to Utah, and everybody went, why the hell did they take it back to Utah? Well, the leading theory is, and the story is, that the Aztecs originated from Utah. So they were taking all their gold home. Anyway, that's a total side note, but that's what Coronado was looking for. And I just love that they were just, it's like Teddy Roosevelt when he's talking about pronghorn antelope, and he just rants on for like 3 pages about how dumb these creatures are, and he really just hated them. And that's kind of like Coronado walking around the American Southwest and talking about what a dump this place is. And so, anyway, but apparently they did stop in Palo Duro Canyon to hold a Thanksgiving celebration and express their gratitude for their survival and to reaffirm their faith. To honor this early, and I apologize about digressing there. I just went down a rabbit hole. That's how it happens. So, to honor this early moment of thanks, a historical marker, of course, was placed in 1959 at the crossing in Palo Duro Canyon, now part of Palo Duro Canyon State Park near Amarillo. The marker commemorates the event, proclaimed as a day of prayer and feasting by Padre Fray Juan de Padilla for Coronado and his men, 79 years before the Pilgrims' iconic gathering in Massachusetts. So, that's a pretty good argument, I guess. However, I guess there's some argument about, was it really the first Thanksgiving? Because did they do it with the natives here locally? And, they were kind of here searching for gold to take away from other people. And Texas wasn't really Texas at that point, in its current form. I don't know. I guess that's where some of the arguments can come from. So, the article goes on to discuss having the pumpkin and turkey capitals of the U.S. right here in Texas. But, I wanted to focus more on the first Thanksgiving. So, if you want to go check out the rest of it, it's really interesting. I read it all. But go read it on your own. That was statesman.com, the Austin Statesman. Austin American Statesman, sorry. So now let's shift to the argument about where the first Thanksgiving in Texas really was. I mean, there is a historical marker in Palo Duro Canyon that states it was there, but, of course, as a lot of things with history are, there's another theory and another story out there. So let's check out the article that I found in the Texas Almanac, texasalmanac.com, to see what it says. So here we go. A new Thanksgiving tradition has taken root in Texas. El Paso residents now claim, and now hang on. So El Paso, so from the Panhandle, Palo Duro Canyon, area to El Paso. If you go look at a map, it doesn't look that far, but it's a long way. And when you think you're almost there going from one to the other, you still have a long way to go. So, but anyway, this modern event, first observed in April 1989, commemorates a day of Thanksgiving celebrated by Spanish explorer Juan de Oñate and his expedition on April 30th, 1598. Now, earlier we were talking about Coronado in 1541. So this happened later, but they questioned the whole Coronado thing. So here we go. So here's the history on it. Juan de Oñate was a member of a distinguished family that had loyally worked for the Spanish crown. His father had discovered and developed rich mines in Zacatecas, Mexico. Oñate himself had opened the mines of San Luis Potosi and performed many other services for the Spanish king. But he wanted to carve an unquestioned place in history by leading an important expedition into unexplored land. He was granted land in the northern Rio Grande Valley among the Pueblo Indians by the Viceroy of New Spain. The Viceroy moved to a new post, however, and his successor was slow to grant Oñate permission to begin his expedition. Finally, in 1597, approval came. To reach his new holdings, Oñate chose to bypass the traditional route that followed the Rio Conchos in present-day Mexico to the Rio Grande, and then northward along the Rio Grande into Mexico. In the summer of 1597, Oñate sent Vicente de Zaldivar to blaze a wagon trail from Santa Barbara in southern Chihuahua, along which could be found adequate water supplies. Zaldivar underwent many hardships, including captures by Indians, in carrying out his instructions. No mention of the hardships was made, however, when he made his report to Oñate. So, basically, the trail blazed by Zaldivar has become a route of the modern highway between Chihuahua City and El Paso. So, and of course, why would he? He had blazed this trail, went through a whole lot of hardships. It pretty much sucked, but he didn't want to disappoint his boss, so he comes back and he goes, I found a route. Let's go. By early March 1598, Oñate's expedition of 500 people, including soldiers, colonists, wives, and children, and 7,000 head of livestock, was ready to cross the treacherous Chihuahuan Desert. Almost from the beginning of the 50-day march, nature challenged the Spaniards. First, 7 consecutive days of rain made travel miserable. Then the hardship was reversed, and the travelers suffered greatly from the dry weather. On one occasion, a chance rain shower saved the parched colonists. If you're ever crossing the desert and it rains for 7 days, just know that's not often. It's a desert for a reason. So anyway, finally, for the last 5 days of the march, before reaching the Rio Grande, the expedition ran out of both food and water, forcing the men, women, and children to seek roots and other scarce desert vegetation to eat. Both animals and humans almost went mad with thirst before the party reached water. 2 horses drank until their stomachs burst, and 2 others drowned in the river in their haste to consume as much water as possible. Could you imagine that? Marching for 50 days, running out of water, being so thirsty that you run to the river and forget that you can't swim and literally drown in the water that you've been seeking for a while. Anyway, it seems weird to me. Anyway, so the Rio Grande was the salvation of the expedition, however. After recuperating for 10 days, Oñate ordered a day of Thanksgiving for the survival of the expedition. Included in the event was a feast supplied with game by the Spaniards and with fish by the natives in the region. Oh, so there we go. That's one of the things that we all think about Thanksgiving is, eating with the Native Americans. So, and finally, Oñate read La Toma, the taking, declaring the land drained by the great river to be the possession of King Philip II of Spain. So, some historians call this one of the truly important dates of history of the continent, making the beginning of Spanish colonization in the American Southwest. A member of the expedition wrote of the original celebration, "We built a great bonfire and roasted the meat and fish, and then all sat down to a repast the like of which we had never enjoyed before. We were happy that our trials were over, as happy as were the passengers in the ark when they saw the dove returning with an olive branch in his beak, bringing tidings that the deluge had subsided." Yeah, it says the trials were over, but come on. Anybody who knows the American Southwest know that trials and tribulations are daily. So anyway, after the celebration, the Oñate expedition continued up the Rio Grande and eventually settled near Santa Fe, New Mexico. As one historian noted, when Jamestown and Plymouth were established early in the 17th century, they were English attempts to gain a foothold in the New World. So Santa Fe was but one of hundreds of towns the Spanish had already established in the New World. And to be frank, I don't think the Spanish really get as much recognition as they should for creating a lot of these towns. We do always think of the English coming and colonizing the New World and everything, but I mean, let's be honest. The Spanish and the Native Americans were here long before that. I mean, there were people in North America for a long time, but, we write the history, so it is what it is. So Sheldon Hall, president of the El Paso Mission Trail Association that sponsored the modern celebration, also said that the first drama presented in North America was part of the celebration. The play, written by Captain Farfan of the expedition, was produced by the soldiers and depicted the conversion of the Indians to Christianity. Because why not? With El Paso's entry into the Thanksgiving sweepstakes, Texas now has 2 observances of what's becoming a crowded field of locales vying for attention as the site of the first Thanksgiving. So, of course, they go on, they say, the second Texas claim was an event held earliest of all those claiming primacy. The Texas Society of Daughters of the American Colonists placed a marker in 1959 just outside of Palo Duro Canyon. It declared that the expedition of Francisco Vasquez de Coronado in May 1541 celebrated the first feast of Thanksgiving in Palo Duro Canyon, and Fray Juan Padilla said a mass at this observance, which is also part of the deal, So Thanksgiving centers around, little bit of religion, a lot of food, and of course always sharing with locals, Native Americans. So, however, later research has found that grapes and pecans were gathered by the celebrants at that feast, neither of which grow in Palo Duro Canyon. Uh-oh. A little bit of controversy. So now there is some doubt as to whether this was a special Thanksgiving or a celebration of the Feast of the Ascension, which is a different thing. It was held in Texas, but may have been on one of the forks of the Brazos River further south, or maybe even Blanco Canyon, which is further south, because of their mention of grapes and pecans. That would make some sense. But, you know what? Let's not let facts get in the way of a good historical marker in a state park. But wait. Yes, there is more. Of course, there is even controversy over the Thanksgiving held on the East Coast. So we're going to get into that a little bit, but yeah. So there's no doubt that Thanksgiving or a Thanksgiving feast or a feast of survival happened in Texas long before the Plymouth colony Thanksgiving. But that's the one that we tend to remember. And then there's some argument about whether, it was just Thanksgiving of survival, which, I don't know, Plymouth colony was probably about too. But anyway, there is no doubt that some sort of big feast happened in Texas long before Plymouth. But now let's get into some of the East Coast. So this article that I'm reading from Texas Almanac goes on to explain this. There's no doubt that the day's Thanksgiving tradition in New England is New England born and bred. It's not a single tradition, though, but a combination of traditions. According to one researcher, Randall Mason, a researcher for Plymouth Plantation, Inc., which operates a model 17th century village at Plymouth, Massachusetts, says today's celebration is a cross between a British harvest festival and a special day of religious Thanksgiving, both originally observed by pilgrims in New England. In 1621, well after the two in Texas, I want to add, just months after their arrival from England, residents of Plymouth celebrated a harvest festival which was indistinguishable from those observed throughout Britain at the time. It was a secular event with feasting and games. The only religious observance was the saying of grace before the meal. 2 years later, the governor of Plymouth Colony called for a special day of religious thanksgiving for the end of a drought that had plagued the colony. This was an extra day of prayer and religious observance, according to Mason. Special days of religious thanksgiving were called throughout the colonial period, whenever they needed it. Connecticut is given credit for initially adopting an annual day of general thanksgiving, the first of which a proclamation exists was called for September 18th, 1639. Although some may have been held earlier, another on record was held in 1644, and from 1649 onward, these special days of general thanksgiving were held annually. Massachusetts Bay Colony began annual observations in 1660. Several other states, however, claimed the first Thanksgiving, of course. Puritans, who arrived to establish Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1630, observed a special day of prayer that is often called the first Thanksgiving. Even earlier, in Florida, a small colony of French Huguenots living near present-day Jacksonville, Florida, noted a special Thanksgiving prayer. The colony was soon wiped out by the Spanish, of course, because they had a big whizzing contest over Florida. Maine, too, stakes a claim to the first Thanksgiving on the basis of a service held by colonists on August 9th, 1607, to give thanks for safe voyage. Virginians are convinced their ancestors celebrated the first Thanksgiving when Jamestown settlers in 1610 held a service of thanksgiving for their survival of a harsh winter. Connecticut, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, Vermont, and Maine had annual Thanksgiving observances before the 19th century. New York joined the parade in 1817. Michigan, Illinois, Iowa, Wisconsin, and Indiana followed not long after. Throughout the 19th century, Thanksgiving observances spread from state to state. Occasionally, special national days of Thanksgiving were proclaimed by American presidents. George Washington called the first national observance in 1789. Sam Houston proclaimed that March 2nd, 1842, Texas Independence Day, be a day of celebration of freedom and Thanksgiving. But Governor George Wood proclaimed the first Thanksgiving observances in Texas for the first Thursday in December in 1849. One thing I do want to point out, no matter who actually claims the first Thanksgiving, it obviously happened in Texas. Hello, because we're talking the 1600s. All these folks, we're talking 1500s. All these folks are talking 1600s. So we win, but I'll keep going. Abraham Lincoln initiated the tradition of a national annual day of Thanksgiving with a proclamation in 1863 during the Civil War. Franklin D. Roosevelt deviated from the practice of observing the last Thursday in November as Thanksgiving in 1939. Retailers noted that a November 30th observance of Thanksgiving that year would leave only 20 shopping days until Christmas. Since the shopping season usually opens with the November holiday, a November 23rd observance was recognized by 23 states, and a similar number stuck to the November 30th celebration. Texas and Colorado commemorated both days because, we like celebrating. Alaska and Hawaii, of course, were not in the Union at the time, so we don't discuss them. In 1941, FDR signed the law making the fourth Thursday in November the nation's official Thanksgiving Day. And why not? Because it's all about money and shopping at this point. However, in 1944, 45, 50, 51, and 56, November had 5 Thursdays, and while other states changed their observances to coincide with the national law, Texas remained the lone holdout observing the last Thursday in 1956. The legislature changed the law in 1957, making the fourth Thursday in November the state's official Thanksgiving. So there you go. As noted multiple times, really the first Thanksgiving held in North America was very obviously in Texas, whether it was in Palo Duro Canyon or Blanco Canyon or on the Brazos River or near El Paso. It doesn't really matter. I think we can all agree that it was actually most likely held in Texas long before the colonists ever did it on the East Coast. And they can all argue about who officially had the first Thanksgiving back on the East Coast. But come on, guys. If you're on the East Coast, just know it was in Texas. And y'all can have your little whizzing match about who had the first one on the East Coast. But the first Thanksgiving, Texas, you're welcome. We own it. So I guess whether the first Thanksgiving, in its current format, I don't know, really was held in Texas or not. I don't know. No one really knows because it sounds like there were lots of days of thanks. Obviously, it wasn't held in the fall. I don't know. There's just lots of, but regardless of what it is, I hope everyone has someone to visit, family to see, and spend time with, and something to be thankful for this year. So enjoy Thanksgiving. I hope y'all have a great day. So what do y'all think? Let me know what other weird and off the wall or interesting Texas history you want to hear about. I want to thank our sponsors again, of course, me and Victory Home Loans. If you know someone moving to or in Texas or Oklahoma, send them my way. TheMichaelMitchell.com. TheMichaelMitchell.com. Remember, I sell dreams, not mortgages. Thank you all for tuning in to episode number 92 of Once Upon a Time in Texas. As always, remember, whether it's Thanksgiving or not, the stars at night are big and bright, deep in the heart of Texas. Y'all have a great week.